Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me for Interview Like It's Second Nature. And again, I'm Dalena Bradley, job interview coach and career marketing specialist. And I'm here to share with you a lot of ideas and tips and strategies that will help you really sell yourself to your next potential employer, stand out from the competition, and win the job. Interviewing can feel a little unnatural, and so with some of these strategies, I'm sure that you'll feel a little more comfortable the next time you go in, and certainly more prepared and confident. So I want to talk about a little bit about strategies to do really well before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. Before I get started, I did want to there are a few housekeeping items though. You automatically join on mute, so you are muted. We are going to take questions for the presentation at the end. I've left ample time for you all to ask some questions, and I'm happy to answer any that you have. And be sure to, the presentation will be available, so if you just chat PDX Mindshare, that was it. Paris is in here with me, who organized the event, and so if you just chat PDX Mindshare, then you can get a copy of the presentation at the end. So there is a private chat and an everyone chat, so just take a look at that before you either request the presentation or you ask the question. So let's get started. So before the interview, really there are 7 things you need to know before you ever set foot in that interview office. And this is about doing that pre-interview research. So first of all, know yourself. This is an excellent opportunity to do a self-scan and decide, okay, what is my ideal next environment where I want to be working? Who are the people I want to surround myself with? What type of company and culture is going to be best for me? So it's really an opportunity to make a positive change. If you're not particularly happy in your job right now, or you feel you've topped out and there's not a lot of room for opportunity and growth, those sorts of things, this is a great time to really do that check and not be so reactive just based on the application or the job descriptions that you're seeing. Know what sets you apart. So what makes you special? What differentiates you from your peers in your position that you're in? And these are also known as your strengths, and this is something that you're going to really want to push and talk about in your interview. Know the job itself. So assuming there is a job description for the position, make sure you know the job description inside and out. It provides a lot of clues as to what the priorities are for the position, and also allows you to tailor some of the information that you bring in. So really scan and know that job description. Know the industry, know the company. What's its position in the market? What are some of the challenges maybe the company has been facing? New products that have been launched recently, maybe new competitors that are challenging their position in the market. You'll want to be able to speak intelligently about that in the interview. So it's so easy to get information from the website and just a Google search. And the interviewer themselves. So be sure you know who you're meeting with. Check out their LinkedIn profile and other social platforms. General Google search is good for this too, so that you will have some pieces of information to make conversation and build rapport with your interviewer. And finally, what are your potential obstacles to success? So knowing what could be, none of these things that I'm going to mention are necessarily bad or negative, but just knowing how something can be perceived is good for you so that you can be able to explain if someone asks you something about, whether maybe you've been fired from a position or you left on bad terms with your employer, or maybe you're lacking certain knowledge or skills that are common for this type of position. Digital dirt. Maybe you have a name that's similar to someone else's, and there's something on social media that's maybe less than positive. So all these things are important so that you can address them should they be asked, and you can have some messaging around that. Another thing before you go into the interview is having some stories to share. So these next 7 slides out of my whole presentation today are the most important of my whole talk, because it is up to you to build a very interesting narrative, and it is what is going to set you apart from other people in your, who are interviewing for the job. So I really want to talk about storytelling. It can be really, really overwhelming to anticipate every single question that might come your way. So I think that if you are able to choose 6 or 8, and let's err on the side of 8 stories that you can share, they'll satisfy a lot of the behavioral questions that might come your way and make it less overwhelming. And again, looking at that job description and looking, what are the major categories of expertise that they're looking at, and then building some stories around there. So really, if you come prepared with stories, knowing your strengths, maybe a couple of your weaknesses, that's a really good foundational formula to anticipate a lot of the questions that are going to come your way. So let's talk about some sample behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you achieved a goal while working under an immense amount of pressure. Describe a time when you had to deal with a difficult client, and how did you handle the situation? Or tell me about a time when you had to persuade a group of people to go along with your idea. This is just to give you a sense for some types of behavioral questions that you might be asked. So how do you frame and organize your stories? Assuming that you have gone through and written a strong resume, you've probably already gone through this exercise. I like using the situation, opportunity, action, and result format, or SOAR. Some people use CAR, which is challenge, action, result, or you've heard STAR, which is situation, task, action, result. It all gets to the same thing, but I'll explain why this is my preference here in a minute. So the first part of developing one of your 8 stories, or even more, is describing that situation or challenge. So, what was the goal? Who was involved? What was your role, and what was the time frame, maybe the budget? You're really setting the stage for the rest of your story, and just giving them a little background information. So this is why I like SOAR the best, because this is where you give your interviewer the hook. So get interviewers on the edge of their seat by describing the opportunity, which is like the consequence, the risk, or the stakes. Here are a few examples of a good hook. We had the chance to double our revenue if we brought on board this new client. So a real opportunity here. or conversely, we were on the verge of losing our biggest client, or our productivity was diminishing by the hour with frequent equipment malfunctions. So you're really saying what were the stakes, and it is this is what makes the interviewer want to hear more. What's next in this story? So then you talk about what action you took. So share what actions you took to achieve the desired outcome, and then name the skills and the competencies involved. So make them, again, relevant to this job. I know someone who hires a lot of people. She hires a lot of software engineering employees, and people will come in and they'll be prepared to talk about all of their strengths. And she says she has to work so hard to get them to connect the dots between their strengths and the actual job that she has available. So again, knowing that job description is really key, which is why you need to use it as a guide or your prompt for your competencies. And then you get to the finale. So explain the result or the benefit to the company to bring to life the success of your actions. So did you meet or beat your time frame? Did you come in under budget? Did it have a positive impact on the department, the company, or even the industry? So I'm going to walk you through an example. So here's a sample situation where we were losing business to a competitor because they had a larger sales force in the same region. So what was the opportunity or risk? We didn't have budget to expand our sales team. If we continued to lose business, we'd have to shut down our Northwest Regional office. So there's a little bit of drama there. To make up for one-on-one meetings with decision makers, I created a popular quarterly events and a well-received webinar series to reach hundreds of prospects at once. And the result? We recovered market share and increased revenue by $5 million within 6 months. Pretty impressive. So again, stories are what set you apart on your resume, but they really set you apart in your interview as well. So now it's almost time, the day has almost arrived, and I'd like to go over some logistics and reminders before you set foot into the office where you'll be interviewing, and things that will really give you peace of mind and sort of reduce anxiety. Know your route to the interview location and allow yourself a lot of extra time. I really suggest you do this not the day of, but the day before or a few days before. And you can also see sometimes Google Maps won't pick up whether there's construction going on in the area. So just take that out of the equation, take that stress out of the equation, and know your route ahead of time. Be early. It is possible to be too early. So I say show up 10 minutes early, but you don't really need to set foot into the reception area until maybe 5 minutes beforehand. If you get there 10 minutes beforehand, then you have time to maybe use the restroom, check the mirror, do a mirror check, make sure you don't have any kale in your teeth, or you know, that your buttons are all straight and that sort of thing. Just do that one last check. Again, it's all peace of mind. Dress to impress. So there are really no hard and fast rules these days about what to wear to an interview. It is up to you to do research ahead of time and decide whether, you know, based on the company, based on the position, based on the job, how you should dress when you go in. Business casual is almost across the board universally accepted, but if you're in a more conservative industry or a larger company, that sort of thing, you might want to take it up a notch. And do take it up a notch from the, position that you're interviewing for, because you do want to put your best foot forward. And I can't emphasize enough that that is still really important. Take a nice looking portfolio with some extra hard copies of your resume and some letters of recommendation if you have them. The reason I bring that up is because it's a nice leave behind for your interviewer. So if you, let's say you've had your interview, you offer the copies of extra hard copies at the beginning to any of the people that you're going to be meeting with, but then at the end you can say, oh, I thought I have some additional information you might find interesting. So letters of recommendation, some paper, pens for note taking, and then of course your stories, strengths and weaknesses, just having those in mind, and then also questions for the interviewer, which is very important, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. So now you are on site, and so the main components of your successful interview are communicating your value that you can do the job, which is what you're going to do with these great stories that you've put together, establishing fit so that you share the same values and cultural characteristics. This is something that the interviewer is going to be trying to determine when they're talking with you, and then also the likability factor. So before you walk in, it's pretty clear if you wouldn't get the interview if they didn't think that you had the skill set to do the job, at least on paper. And maybe you've been through a phone interview by now. So a lot of what the interviewer is going to try to find out is whether they can work with you. And what that really means is whether they like you. And so can you make someone like you? Can you make an interviewer like you? I am going to share some ideas that I think will help, certainly. So I was in the offices of Lee Hecht Harrison recently, which is a large placement leader here in Portland. And I was talking with a senior associate there we were chatting, and he said, yeah, you're either hired or you're not during the walk from the lobby. And we laughed about it. But honestly, it's not too far from the truth, because those first few seconds and minutes really count. They are mission critical in developing rapport with the interviewer. And so to get things off to a good start, I know this is really basic, but giving a firm handshake, making good eye contact, and smiling as that first point of contact is really important. Just like pretty much any social situation, that is just a really good way to say, hi, I'm here, I'm present, I'm confident, with that firm handshake. And making light conversation along the way to the office. So it may be that your interviewer is going to take the lead, and they'll have a few things to say. But if they don't, then you need to be prepared to make a little bit of conversation and engage with the person. So it could be as simple as, how's your day going so far? Or, maybe you are, you notice some interesting artwork in the lobby, or there's some construction going on out in the street, and I always say there's always the weather. So you can find something to talk about for those first minutes to, again, build rapport and engage with your interviewer. One thing, I wanted to step back for a second. One thing that I forgot to mention is when that interviewer comes out to meet you in the lobby, stay standing. When you're waiting in the lobby, stay standing. Presumably you haven't gotten there too early. And when the interviewer comes out, you'll be already making eye contact at their level. And it really is a great way to be on equal ground physically with the person, because you are an equal participant in this. Sometimes job seekers feel like the employer has all the power. They're walking in, they're going to decide whether or not you get to get the job or get the offer. And that's true, but the reason you're there is potentially you have something they want. And so really remember that you are an equal participant, and that just having that equal ground, that eye contact directly from the onset is a nice way to subconsciously say, I'm here and we're equal. And we're going to have a good conversation. Okay, so you're making conversation on the way to the office. Another way to sort of gather some data as you're walking is to assess the interviewer and their communication style so that you can adapt to it. So, for example, is the interviewer moving quickly down the hallway? Are they moving more slowly? Do they seem like a more reserved personality, or do they seem like a more extroverted personality? Do they have a high speaking volume or a low speaking volume? These are all data points that you can gather to use to your advantage when you're having a longer conversation with them. If you adapt your style, so if you're meeting with somebody who's maybe really reserved or seems to be that way, and you're an off-the-charts extrovert, then bring it down a little bit so you're not overwhelming that personality type. And the reverse is true as well. So keep that in mind. It's really good information to have as you're sitting and having the conversation. Okay, so body language. What you don't say can really be as important as what you do say in the interview. We already have gone over the firm handshake. I can't tell you enough. Offering this kind of wimpy, limp handshake can subconsciously tell a person that you're not maybe as confident in yourself. And what we want to accomplish in this meeting is that you indeed are very confident in yourself and your ability to do the job. So a good posture is to sit straight in your chair or maybe slightly forward, and definitely don't cross your legs or lean too far back. And when I say cross your legs, I mean the ankle over the knee, where it's sort of a figure four. Pretty casual body language for a first job interview and even a second. So just take that off the table. Smiling occasionally. This is really sometimes hard to remember to do. You're in a somewhat nerve-wracking situation, and so just remember occasionally to break all the seriousness with a smile to show that you're a friendly and approachable person and a pleasant person. And making eye contact, good eye contact, not where you're staring the person down, of course, but where you're making good, steady eye contact. And then not putting barriers in front of yourself. So we talk about not crossing our arms. Sometimes it's a really just comfortable position to stand in. But when you're in an interview situation, crossing your arms or having that portfolio that you brought in front of your torso, that can really sort of put a barrier up, and subconsciously it can be a mistrust builder. So keep keep your body language open, and keep things keep it barrier free, so that you can show that you're a trustworthy, confident person. Keep your feet and legs still. Sometimes, if you're nervous and you tend to fidget a lot, this is the time to just really try to be calm and, not tug too much at your clothes or move your legs around and that sort of thing. Keep the focus on what it is you are selling about your skills and the conversation that you're having, because the more The fidgeting that you do, it's all distracting behavior, and you don't want to distract the interview. You want to engage them. Okay, mirroring the interviewer. This is called isopraxism, and this is, you need to do this with finesse, really, but it is another subtle way of building rapport non-verbally with the person that you're talking to. So, for example, if they are, leaning a little bit forward in their chair, then perhaps you lean a little bit more forward in your chair. So this is telling you they're engaged. If they're leaning forward, that's a good sign. And so you lean forward a little bit. And, if they sit back a little, maybe you sit back just a little bit, not too much. If they're leaning from one side or the other, again, subtly you can mirror their nonverbal language and help build rapport that way. It really does. If they're doing something, I want to say a side note, if they're doing something like, fidgeting with their clothes or itching their head or something like that, please don't mirror that. So anyway, each of you really has a unique set of circumstances, unique background, professional background. And so I'm going to try to cover a few questions. We already talked about a behavioral question, but I'm going to talk about a few commonly asked questions and some ways to frame responses. Tell me about yourself is a common icebreaker question from employer to prospective employee. This is not your life story. This is a really quick overview of your background with a personal detail or two. I like to hybridize this response. Some people say keep it completely professional. Some people say have a professional story and a personal story. I like to hybridize this so that you're giving a glimpse of yourself as a person and as a professional. Again, it's that likability factor. If you're showing a little bit of a glimpse about who you are as a person, then that can help with the rapport building. So I want to caution you, this is a different question than walk me through your resume. So walk me through your resume is, I started out here and I worked in this position and then I was promoted and then I changed companies because I was recruited, and you really are just giving the person kind of a quick historical account of your background. But tell me about yourself is really a broad brush stroke. So let's go through one example of a finance professional. So you can thank the interviewer for asking, and this, by the way, might sound a little robotic the way I wrote it. You'll want to deliver this in a really conversational tone, but it is, meant to just give you an example. And so thank you for asking. I'm a native Oregonian, and I grew up on a large wheat ranch, which is where I developed a strong work ethic from an early age. I went to U of O and I worked in a number of jobs and industries until 15 years ago when I took an entry-level finance position, found I enjoyed it, and stayed the course. In my 10 years at Columbia Coffee Company, I've ascended in roles with progressively more responsibility to my current position as Director of Finance. I truly enjoy this work and look forward to discussing how my successes can apply to this job. That took probably 30 seconds. And so you'll obviously adapt that to your own position. Some people want to talk about where they went to school. Some people don't. That might depend a little bit about where you are in your career, if you're a newer professional, new into the workforce versus mid-career or later career. But just have something put together and practice this a little bit. But again, keep it brief. And if you feel like you've been too brief, you can certainly ask the interviewer, hey, can I expand on any of those points? Why are you in the job market? So there are a number of reasons why you may be in the job market and why you may be listening to this presentation today. Maybe you were laid off. Maybe you have gone as far as you can go in your current company. Maybe you've had a gap for, you haven't been working for some time and need to go back to work for some reason, or maybe it's just time for a change. You've been at your company for a long time and it's time to grow professionally. So there are a number of reasons why you might be in the job market, but no matter what your reason, when you respond to this, stay positive. No matter how miserable you might be at your current job, or if you're working with a boss who's really, really difficult, resist the temptation, stay positive, stay really focused on this job and this opportunity. So don't badmouth your former or your current employer, your boss, or your coworkers. I was speaking, this hiring manager that I mentioned earlier, who does a lot of hiring, she had an internal candidate referral who was really almost a shoo-in because they had been recommended internally, and they had a great skill set. The resume was beautiful. Everything was great. And so she got to talking with the person, and apparently they felt pretty comfortable, maybe knowing that they had come through an employee referral. So they were very comfortable and started bad-mouthing their current employer. It was a complete turnoff to her, and she disqualified the candidate right then and there because she felt like she didn't want that negative energy being brought into her company, and that she would be the next person that person would be talking about in their next job interview. So focus on this potential employer and what you can do for them and what problem you can solve for them. And why do you want to work here? So give an informed but not self-serving answer that's focused on the company and how your skills will help that company. So maybe this company is 5 minutes from your house and it would be just a dreamy commute, or they're notoriously great about their benefits and generous vacation, salaries, even like the perks are really, really good. And that's fine. Be happy about that. But internalize that for now. So in the interview, you want to talk about really why you're excited about the company and the opportunity, not about the benefits and the perks. So here is one example. I'm excited that I'd be part of building this new customer success team from the ground up, bringing this exact experience from my current job. I'm energized by the company's culture and believe in its products, and would be happy to work with such a great group of smart and talented people. So you can definitely generalize about the culture and that sort of thing, but save those other that could be perceived as more self-serving aspects for another time. Okay, what's your greatest weakness? So none of us really like to think about our weaknesses, but you'll probably be asked this in some form during the course of the interview. And they may ask it in some other way, areas of improvement. But a way to frame this is really to be genuine. Gone are the days of saying, oh, I'm a perfectionist, or I work too hard. Those are cliche responses. So think of something specific that is genuine, but isn't central to the job that you're discussing. And talk about how you're overcoming or addressing the issue. That is the main point I want to make, because you are coming in to interview because they have a gap of some kind. There is a problem to solve. So if you're talking about how you're overcoming or addressing one of your own issues or areas for improvement, it is a way to demonstrate that you are a solutions-oriented person. So here's a way to frame your response to what's your greatest weakness. And again, make it specific. This is pretty general, but being positive. I've been fortunate to have a successful career, but I'm always looking for ways to grow and work on areas for improvement. One area in particular is, and then you fill in the blank, and I am or have addressed this by. And then here are a few good categories of how you might be addressing the issue. If you were a senior level person in your company and you hired people, this person, you know, maybe you hired someone who has a complementary skill set. So maybe you're a financial person who is responsible for communicating financial information to a large employee population. But it's not your favorite thing to do, so maybe you hire somebody to help compile and distribute that information in a really understandable way. Routinely meeting and idea sharing with respected peers. That's proactive and good, or creating a new process or routine for the situation. So if maybe you're not a real detail-oriented person, maybe you set up a system where it's sort of a foolproof way that you don't overlook certain important details about your job. So all of these are just some examples, and you would want to tailor that to your situation. I wanted to quickly address some off-limits questions by the interviewer, just to you know, educate on what's against the law for someone to ask you. So the main ones are race, age, religion, place of birth, disability, marital status, and children. And so there may be, hopefully, you have a savvy interviewer who's not going to ask you these types of questions. But if you do find that you're faced with some of these questions, then there are a number of ways you can answer or not answer to address this. So the first way is to answer the question. The second is to refuse to answer the question. So that is an option. The third is ask how it pertains to the job. You know, you can ask in a non-confrontational way, excuse me, can you tell me how this pertains to this particular job? Or you can assume the intent behind the question. So, for example, if someone says, do you have kids? You can say, well, if you're thinking, you know, that whether I'm able to travel extensively like the job requires, or work, you know, on the weekends or the evenings, that's absolutely not a problem. Hasn't ever been a barrier for me in my career. And hopefully that'll move forward the conversation. You can walk away. You can say, you know what, that's out of line, and you can get up and you can walk away. However, if you want to keep your options open, certainly if they're asking this question, that gives you a clue about, you know, certainly this person, and that they're not particularly educated on this. But if you want to keep the door open and your options open for potentially an offer so that you do have a choice of whether to say yes or no, I say go with number 3, asking how it pertains to the job or assuming the intent behind the question. Okay, so now we're getting to a point where we want to talk about sample questions to ask in an interview. So the point is here that I really want to make is go in with a long list of questions to ask the interviewer. I say go in with 8 questions maybe, because you might get some of them answered during the course of the interview. And so you want to have more than what you need, and then just be prepared to ask 2 or 3. So what are the department's goals for the next 5 years? These are just some general ones. Outside of what I could gather online, how would you describe the company culture? How would you describe your management style? What are some of the challenges you're facing that keep you up at night? So those are just a few examples. But have questions. If they say, what questions do you have questions, rather than, oh, I think you've answered everything. Really, they want to answer your questions. What not to ask: don't ask about salary, benefits, vacation, or workload. Wait until you have the offer. And finally, closing the interview. Is there any aspect of my experience you'd like me to expand upon? Have I shared enough about myself and my experience you're comfortable moving on to the next step? And most importantly, what is your timeline for making a decision? So take the ambiguity out of the follow-up. That is a really nerve-wracking thing for a lot of job seekers. You know, what is your preference for how I follow up on my candidacy? Knowing that the answers to that last question is going to give you peace of mind for exactly how you follow up with the employer. Okay, so for after the interview, follow up with a purpose. Immediately send a thank you email to everyone that you met with. Handwritten note is still fine, but an email is more immediate. I've talked to somebody who went out to the parking lot, wrote their handwritten thank you notes, and then delivered them to the receptionist for distribution same day. So almost as immediate with a personal touch. But either way you go, restate your appreciation, mention something really relevant or interesting from your conversation, reinforce your main strengths, address the problem that you're going to solve, and check in as preferred by your prospective employer because you already asked them. So nothing beats a little one-on-one conversation and practice. And so if you are interested in one-on-one interview coaching with me, there is my contact information. And I've also included a free tip sheet that you can access with the URL below that will give you some more information on distance interviewing and some more interview tips that will hopefully help make your next interview situation like second nature. And I really, again, want to thank you for joining me today. And I think we're now at the point where we're going to take questions. Okay, so they're asking about a 2-year gap in employment. They want to go back into the, into the same industry, and how do I address this? So first of all, if you've been doing any volunteer work or any special project work in between, that counts certainly as experience. So I would certainly add that to your resume and or LinkedIn profile. If that's not the case, that's okay. People stop working for a variety of different reasons. So, I've suggested people sometimes put on their resume, let's say 2016 to 2018, family caregiver, or sometimes people will take some time off to care for a family member who's really ill or something like that. So, but a 2-year gap is not huge, and again, emphasizing if there's been any project work or volunteer work, that can certainly fill the gap. And then use that cover letter if you submit an application to perhaps explain that very briefly, but maybe in a way, I'm really excited to return to this. After a 2-week break, maybe you traveled or something like that, or had some sort of interesting experience. I can't tell without knowing your particular situation, but those are a few considerations. So the next question is, how do you find out who is interviewing? If you are working with a recruiter, or even if you're not, you can call the HR department. Normally, when you're set up for an interview, it's often a third party, either someone in HR or a recruiter, and you can ask that person a lot of questions like this. So what's the name of the person? What's their title in the organization? So just ask that question, and if it's the hiring manager themselves, then you'll have that person's name. But if you don't know, it sounds to me like it was probably a third party that tried to set you up, and just ask that person. Okay, if you are pivoting from a relevant but different position than you've been in before, how do you address that with the employer? Reinforce that you're qualified. Okay, so so you highlight the relevancies. Again, studying that job description and cross-referencing it with what you've done that relates and pertains to the job. So I realize that's a really generic response, but it's true. So it sounds like it's a pivot. It's not a complete change. And especially if it's been in the same industry, you can reinforce, hey, I know this industry really well, and I know this product or this service really well. And just those are the things I would focus on, is just cross-referencing that position with what's the most relevant, and then highlighting your industry. Okay, so then it might be, the question was, what do you do when your interviews really don't go anywhere? This person sounds like they've been through several interviews, and for some reason or another, they're not getting the job. I'd be interested in knowing how many interviews you've had, but sometimes it's just, maybe there's an internal candidate that you were competing with, and that can be an issue. There's often a lot of preference given to internal candidates. Maybe you weren't quite as experienced as the next person, or maybe there really is something in the way you're presenting yourself. So it could be that maybe there's some subtle body language issue or something like that, and that's really about practice. Maybe it's tailoring your messaging to this job specifically, and talking in generalizations rather than specific stories. So it could be a number of different reasons, but it sounds like you're in a position where it's probably time to stop and reboot and reassess, because you don't want to keep going down the same trajectory. It's also okay to ask for feedback from people you've interviewed with. It sounds like maybe you did that. And HR often will just say, oh, we hired somebody with skills that were more closely matched to the job. That's a pretty standard response, because of, they're afraid of retribution on that. But those are my initial thoughts on that. So the question is, how do you get specific feedback back on an interview, and why you did not get the offer? So I would, it can be very confrontational if you say, hey, why didn't I get the job over somebody else? But what you can say that is positive, and you want to keep good, positive relationships, because guess what? What if their top candidate didn't work out, and you were number two? You want to keep positive relationships with these potential employers. I don't know if you're calling in Portland. Portland's a small town. Don't want to burn any bridges. So I would say that it is perfectly acceptable to say, hey, can you give me some feedback on my interview? I would really like to know, how I came across, and what feedback could you give me going forward about how I can improve? And you know what? The worst they can say is, I'm sorry, I can't, or I don't feel comfortable. That's the worst they can say, but you can certainly ask the question. So this person's asking about they are having interactions with junior recruiters who may not seem like savvy interviewers, and how to get around that. And my response to that is, first of all, get my freebie on distance interviewing, because phone interviews are a favorite way for employers to bring candidates, and you should treat the phone interview as importantly as you would an in-person interview, because that's the only way that you're going to progress in the job. That's number one. Number two is really you can't create the questions that they ask, but you can certainly inject information you want them to have, and that takes a little bit of practice. So having those stories, so if the junior recruiter, they're asking you about a particular skill, then you talk about that skill, back it up with a little story in a conversational way that might give them a little bit more information than what they originally asked. So that's a hard one to get around, and I understand your frustration. But building that rapport on the phone and being, you know, as friendly and pleasant as possible, and then trying to maybe just jam in a little extra fact or story in those screening questions can really help. Okay, so this person's asking, is it okay to ask for an informational interview after you were disqualified from an actual job interview with that person? That's a really good question. I think it depends on the relationship, because if you went into that job interview maybe through a warm networking connection or something like that, I would say it would be more acceptable to ask for that kind of informational interview. But in this case, it may be, I think the person might raise a flag, and they might feel put on the spot, and like maybe they're going to have to answer questions about specifically why you didn't get the job, and maybe that you would want to sell them again, maybe like it would be another interview, so to speak. So I would be careful on this one and really regard your position or your relationship to the person and how you got into the job. If it's somebody that you knew, really well, again, or through a connection that you knew really well, then I'd say you can go ahead and pose the question and see if they'd be willing to meet with you. There's nothing wrong with that. The worst they can say is no, but I think it could make someone uncomfortable about a possible sort of grilling, perceived grilling, if you didn't get the job and you're kind of going for a second interview, if you will. And I know that's not what you're asking. You're asking for an informational interview, but it's all about the perception. Last question. The question is, how do you answer the question about why I left a position if the reason was the company claiming that I was not meeting performance standards, even though I disagree? How do I answer the question without scaring off the interviewer? Okay, so I always say don't volunteer a negative unless they are ever so specific. Were you fired? That's one question. Why you left a company, and if there is dispute about whether you left for cause or not, then I think you keep it. You want to be honest with the person, but you don't necessarily need to raise the fact that you might or might not have been fired for cause unless somebody asks, have you been fired? So I think probably the best response here is to talk about any factors that came into play. Again, I would keep it really succinct. All of your interview responses should be really succinct about this, but whether there was an organizational change that impacted it, or really, if there was a departmental shift, those sorts of things, those are better to talk about than, my company fired me for performance issues or cause. And especially if you have a history with the company and you have been with the company for a long time and had great performance reviews, and there was some sort of personnel change or organizational shift or department shift, I would focus your response on that. If somebody says, were you fired directly, then you do need to be honest about that, but keep it very brief. Okay, so a recording of this webinar will be posted on PDX Mindshare's YouTube channel tomorrow. And I really want to, again, thank you all so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that you gained some really valuable information today.